What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so I'm gonna bring something a little different today. I mean, we've been talking about, criminal aliens and everything going on with those. We've been talking about a lot of nonsense, as a matter of fact. And, I'm gonna be honest, it was hard to find a story that wasn't talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, because another judge today gave a scathing ruling upholding that, yes, you must bring this guy back. These people are willing to violate laws to get this guy back. As a matter of fact, that Democratic senator that we was talking about yesterday may have violated the Logan Act by trying to influence foreign policy, not on behalf of the actual person that is in charge of foreign policy, because this person is so deranged with the person that is involved in charge of foreign policy that they can't see that they are violating laws to get back a criminal. It's all absurd what is going on. This guy is a criminal. As a matter of fact, more evidence of his criminality has come out since then. And I'm not trying to get off on some sort of rant about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Armando Abrego. Like, question for the comments right quick. Like, why do people in Southern America, South America, Central America, of, say, Spanish descent, why do they have four names? Anybody know that? Kilmar of Armando Abrego Garcia. Like, I've noticed that with a lot of these people. They always have four names instead of three. Is that a trend worldwide? Like, I really don't know. It's a genuine curiosity, if you will. But without any further ado, enough of my ranting. I had to get that off my chest because I almost covered that article, but I'm like, man, I've been covering this guy for a week straight, pretty much. And it's just been, I'm tired of talking about this guy that's sitting in a Salvadorian prison, as a matter of fact. So let's get into today's news, which is clearly different. Natalie Winters uncovers Zuckerberg ties to anti-Trump far-left lawfare after New York Times report. This is very fascinating. It's a fascinating article, y'all. And it just goes to show that, a lot of these media personalities, you can't really trust. Mark Zuckerberg, after Trump gets elected, comes out and says, we're doing away with fact-checking and blah, blah, blah. We're going to go to a community notes type of system, kind of like X is doing. And, he's like, we want freedom of speech, blah, 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 blah. And he's trying to show that he's moving more libertarian than left wing, right? And a lot of people are like, yeah, this is fake. It's clearly fake. That was a lot of people's opinion. I was, optimistic, if you will. I'm like, yes, this is good. These people are seeing that, the tide's turning. Things are starting to move away from this far left nonsense ideology and move back to the center, move back to normality, move back to reality. And it's just not that simple, folks. And we've had so much lawfare. And you got to ask yourself, where does the funding come from all this lawfare? Because it's not, governmental organizations, states, blah, 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 suing the administration. Some of it is, sure. But most of it is not. And, these lawsuits cost lots and lots of dollars, y'all. They are not cheap, we'll put it that way. They're into the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars to sue the federal government for nonsense. And then you go to appeals, that's even more money, and it just goes on and on and on. So you got to ask yourself, where does this funding come from? Well, check this out. Let's get into it, y'all. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, founded in 2015 by Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan, has made substantial donations over the years to nonprofits that are now actively pushing against the Trump administration's policies and practices, both in the courts and in marketing media, according to a detailed thread from War Room White House correspondent Natalie Winters. CZI, I'm sorry. It looks like a 1 on my screen right here, which has the mission to help solve some of society's toughest challenges, from eradicating disease and improving education to addressing the needs of our local communities, and to build a more inclusive, just, and healthy future for everyone. has distributed nearly $7 billion in grants since their founding. I almost said funding, because we're dealing with funding here. In a deep dive, Winters discovered that a great deal of funds have been given to groups that are actively opposing the new policies and practices of the Trump administration. Much of their work in the courts, in media, and in advocacy would not be possible were it not for the generous support of CZI, per Winters' analysis. Winters said on Thursday that a progressive foundation that Mark Zuckerberg has funneled $2 billion to is bankrolling one of the leading groups currently suing the Trump administration, and at Doge, she listed the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which Zuckerberg has an account with, which supports Protect Democracy, a progressive political group. Yeah, so that's where a lot of this funding has come from. And as a matter of fact, we covered this very suit that they're talking about here. We covered this, I forget how long ago it was. It's still, caught up in appeals, I believe, if it's the right court case that I'm thinking of. But I remember, Protect Democracy being one of the litigants in that case. The New York Times ran an article the day after the allegations claiming, no, Mark Zuckerberg has not donated any money to a nonprofit that is suing the Trump administration. You gotta love the opposition media. They are so quick to come out and say, nuh-uh, and then just go on to not substantiate anything that they say. That, their substantiations essentially boil down to, logic, if you will. Oh, well, this doesn't make sense because of this, and we put A and B together and got C. Well, it's like, well, that's not how alphabet works, is it? No, the alphabet isn't math, so you can't put A and B together and get C. That's not how letters work, by the way. But it's like they just come out and give this big opposition. They'll make this big news article and say, nuh-uh. And that's pretty much it, and just give you some sort of loose logical ties that aren't really logical ties. It's funny. It really is funny. The article took direct aim at Winters and her claim that CZI was funding Protect Democracy, which in turn is part of a lawsuit brought by labor unions against Mr. Trump to prevent the Department of Government Efficiency from getting access to government data. The Times states that a spokesperson for Mr. Zuckerberg told the New York Times that neither Mr. Zuckerberg nor his wife nor their joint philanthropic organization, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, have ever made a donation to Protect Democracy. However, in response, Winters released an extensive list of historical beneficiaries from CZI. The funding from CZI goes to education, technology, medical research, and other areas. These groups have used their funds to combat Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, to aid illegal immigrants in avoiding lawful deportation, to obstruct the confirmation of Trump's cabinet picks, and generally to resist all things Trump. Zuckerberg, however, has changed his tune over the past year. He was in attendance at Trump's inauguration in Washington, D.C. on January 20th and donated $1 million to the inaugural fund. During the campaign, he spoke up for Trump, praising his fortitude for following the assassination attempt against him in Butler, PA, calling Trump's reaction badass. The push by the federal government to censor Americans on Facebook seemed to get under Zuckerberg's skin, as he revealed in letters to lawmakers that indicated that Rep. Jim Jordan's Facebook files had only scratched the surface of uncovering what had been asked by the Biden regime of the social media giant. That is right. Yeah, we delved in a lot to those Facebook files and the YouTube files and the Twitter files and all of that. We found extensive evidence proof outright that the federal government under the Biden administration was absolutely censoring people. But that's not what we're talking about, is it? We're talking about funding Protect Democracy, because that was the claim. Now, they do fund, and she did come out with a lot of evidence showing stuff that Mark Zuckerberg has funded, but have they funded Protect Democracy? That's what we want to know. And so far, they haven't said anything about that yet. However, the evidence showing that they have funded a whole host of other anti-Trump actions, I guess you could call it. You know, this illegal immigrant nonsense, funding these people, giving these people funding for their legal defense, blah, 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 you name it. As a matter of fact, opposing some of Trump's cabinet picks. This is all like counter to what we were getting from Mark Zuckerberg, as a matter of fact. Like, Mark Zuckerberg really looked like he just flipped on a dime. And, you know, like I said, to a lot of people, that was, hang on just a second, that's a little bit suspicious, if you will. Me, I was a little bit more optimistic, thinking, yes, finally the tides are turning, but we shall see, I guess. Zuckerberg went on the Joe Rogan Experience and discussed the pressure that he said the Biden administration and Democrats put on Facebook to censor American speech on COVID. He said he no longer identified as a Democrat and vowed to stop giving political donations to that party or running cover for them on Facebook. He was in attendance at Mar-a-Lago dinners as well. Winters alleged that his foundation is still backing Democrat initiatives and causes, though that database, per Winters, has been scrubbed. As Winters details, CZI funds went to CASA in 2019, which also received funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. The group is the largest Latino and immigrant-based organization in the Mid-Atlantic, working to organize, advocate for, and expand opportunities for immigrants and working people. They specialize in employment placement, workforce development and training, health education, citizenship and legal services, and financial, language, and literacy training, married with community organizing, advocacy, and civic engagement. They have joined with the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, as well as 5 pregnant mothers, to sue the Trump administration over the executive order to end birthright citizenship for non-citizen parents. Now, update on that, as a matter of fact. That case was looked at by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court went ahead and kept the stay on, pretty much holding the ending of birthright citizenship, but they're going to hear arguments in May, so we're going to see. I really hope Trump sends the best of the best to go argue this case, because it was never the intent of the founders to have 200 years later to have Democrats and all these advocacy groups advocate for people that do not belong here, that came into this country, broke our laws to get here, and are simply here to make children to anchor themselves to this country, right? It's pretty much a loophole in the system, and Democrats have exploited that loophole and say, no, it's in the Constitution. You're defying the Constitution, calling, this executive order by Donald Trump illegal. Well, an executive order, no, that's not illegal. The intent of the executive order was to bring the case to the Supreme Court, right? Essentially, because he knows they are absolutely gonna litigate this. They're not gonna want this to stand. They're gonna bring this to the courts. And I think a lot of Donald Trump's executive orders are meant for that. Now, some of them, obviously, they are meant to make America great again, secure our borders, fire a bunch of people, which I'm fine with most of Donald Trump's executive orders, by the way. Now the birthright citizenship, I'm really, really looking closely at this one, because I want this one to push through the Supreme Court. I really do, because I am tired of, people taking advantage of the United States. This is also why I am mostly behind all the tariff nonsense, because the vast majority of those tariffs are meant to renegotiate trade with these other countries. And I know a lot of people, they're like, oh, what are these tariffs supposed to do? We don't know. Oh, they're illegal, by the way. Well, the EEPA says otherwise, as a matter of fact. But, that the birthright citizenship, getting back to that, I just don't think that it was meant by the founders to have people break our laws to come into the country to anchor themselves here by just having a kid. No, that's not what the founders meant. That's why they specifically wrote in there people that have babies in the country under the jurisdiction of the United States, right? If you're in the country illegally, you're not under our jurisdiction technically because you're not supposed to be in the country. We don't really know you're in the country. So therefore, you're not subject to our jurisdiction until we find you and take you into custody. Then you are. But at that point, you're not going to have a baby. So I think this really needs to be overturned by the Supreme Court. This needs to go through. And then after it does, Congress needs to legislate this into the Constitution, as a matter of fact, to have it from now on that only American citizens that have babies, put it this way. They need to stipulate that as long as you're in the country legally, right? I'm not trying to end birthright citizenship outright, and that's not the intent of Donald Trump either, because it specifically says, and I think this will be bared out in the Supreme Court, that, if you're in the country legally, like if you have a green card or a work visa or blah, 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 as long as you came in through legal means, in other words, you don't even have to be a citizen. It says this in the executive order. You do not have to be a citizen. If you're in the country legally and you have a baby, we're fine with that. You're good to go. Because, you got a work visa, blah, blah, blah. You're probably trying to become a citizen, blah, blah, blah. You probably will be a citizen. Good. We want to encourage these things. We want to encourage everybody in the world that if you want to come to the United States and try to get a piece of the American pie, try to get a piece of that dream, that we want you to do it the right way. We need to disincentivize, illegal immigration. But, and hey, what Donald Trump is doing right now, I think is a good idea. Send them to the El Salvador prison. Anybody that comes into this country, because they will think twice. Because if they're caught, they're going to spend time in a terrorist prison, as a matter of fact. And that's probably not somewhere you want to spend. Now, Democrats keep saying, oh, it's rife with abuse, human rights abuse, and blah, 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 blah. Well, a prison is a prison, and all prisons are, abusive to human rights, if you will. You lose your rights once you are incarcerated, as a matter of fact. You don't have the rights to freedom of speech. You cannot express yourself how you want to. You cannot bear arms. You don't have any privacy rights. The list goes on. A lot of your rights go away. A lot of them. So, all this stuff about, oh, they're violating human rights. Who cares? It's a terrorist confinement center, as a matter of fact. Just saying. But let's keep going. I don't even remember where the hell I was at. As is often the case in philanthropic endeavors, one foundation funds a second foundation, which in turn funds nonprofits, which fund grants and projects for still other ventures. Winters notes that CZI has in previous years given at least $500,000 to Common Justice, a group that develops and advances solutions to violence that transforms the lives of those harmed and foster racial equity without relying on incarceration. This basically means that they seek to reform prisons by abolishing them. They are fighting against Trump's mass deportation plans under the perspective that it is putting more people in prison, causing dehumanization and trauma. Common Justice is part of Protect Democracy, which has brought suit against the Trump administration. This is another thing, another little aspect to all of this. This is one thing that, with USAID and what they were doing. And as a matter of fact, a story I almost covered. As a matter of fact, no, I'm covering it next, where a judge found that the EPA must unfreeze funding that was frozen by Lee Zeldin. As a matter of fact, they brought some concerns of malfeasance, a little bit of fraud, conflicts of interest, blah, 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 blah. And the judge decided, no, we're going to fund this nonsense. And, the government gives out grants to green endeavors, if you will. And some of those nonprofits and, NGOs donate money to Act Blue, funneling money from the U.S. government, from you, or printed dollars, whichever it may be, to an NGO, to Act Blue, back to Democrats. right? And it's Democrats that are partially in charge of appropriating said money. That's why they're constantly using here lately. Oh, it's congressionally approved. It's congressionally apportioned. Blah, 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 blah. When it's like, is it though? Because, the legislation for a lot of this is not that specific. It's incumbent upon the administration to dole out, if you will, all of these grants to these organizations for whatever it may be. Fascinating that is, isn't it? And once they give a grant to an NGO or nonprofit, whatever it may be, there is no more oversight of that money. So it's hard to keep a paper trail. So that's what seems to be happening here, where Natalie Winters has found that, they may have not directly funded Protect Democracy or some of this stuff that is fighting against the Trump administration, but they indirectly funded some of this stuff. So, they send money to this place, and this place sends money to this place, and this place sues the Trump administration. That is what is going on. Now, anybody with a brain can see that, of course, a lot of these places are suing the Trump administration. So it is conjecture, if you will, to say that, yes, Zuckerberg is funding anti-Trump movements, blah, 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 blah. But, there is evidence to show this, and it would take, federal investigators, essentially, to actually be able to figure this out. I don't think independent investigators have the amount of push, I guess, the weight behind them, if you will, to go through and actually follow the paper trail all the way to its end result. So, it is what it is, but we can all put 2 and 6 together and get 8. It's not like putting A and B together and getting C. According to Influence Watch, Common Justice has received funds from CZI, albeit in a roundabout way. The Just Trust was established by CZI and spun off to begin issuing grants in 2022. It was given $350 million for a 5-year effort in grant making for criminal justice reform. Well, I wonder what that means. In 2022, the Just Trust launched the Safer Communities Accelerator to fund more programs. That group took $4 million from the $350 million that CZI used to spin off the Just Trust and gave it to 8 organizations with Common Justice among them. Common Justice is part of Protect Democracy, which has filed a lawsuit challenging the federal government's use of Doge. Zuckerberg's wife, Chan, is the leader of Just Trust. Imagine that. So now, finally, we're getting to connecting all the dots here. The expose from Winters, which reveals funds having gone to some dozen left-wing groups over the years from CZI, shows how entrenched leftism is in American charities, corporations, corporate giving, and institutions. The same groups that Zuckerberg was funding through his charitable giving are the ones who are fighting now in courts and in activism to maintain the status quo. So what it sounds like to me is that some of these foundations and a lot of this money doled out by Zuckerberg in the past is now coming around to bite him in the butt. That's what it sounds like to me, because Zuckerberg has just recently made a about-face turn, right? That 6 months ago, something like that. And what it sounds to me is that a lot of this funding is coming from like 2023, 2022, 2019, blah, 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 blah. You get it. So to me, it sounds like, yes, as a matter of fact, New York Times, Mark Zuckerberg is funding Protect Democracy, is partially funding some of this anti-Trump sentiment, because, a lot of that funding, they may have still be hanging on to some of that $350 million, $400 million, $500,000, however much the amounts may be for some of this stuff. So this is how a lot of this stuff works. And this is why the Trump administration, and Doge specifically, this is why they immediately went after USAID. Immediately. Because USAID most of their budget was grants given out to NGOs that gave out that money to other nonprofits and other groups to do whatever it may be. This is why Doge hasn't touched the Defense Department yet, because they're going after the apparatus that funds the lawfare of Democrats. Now, you might say, well, that's retributive, if that's even a real word. Retributive, however you want to say it. That's retribution incarnate. Not really, because I see a lot of it as fraud. The government does not fund left-wing causes, should not fund left-wing causes. And if they are, like with this whole Green Bank deal that we're going to be talking about next, it's nonsense, y'all. Congress legislated money to go to the EPA, for the EPA to give money to these climate groups. And we know, for the most part, that these climate groups, they fund a lot of left-wing causes, a lot of left-wing nonsense, right? They don't put the money toward actual green projects. They put some of it there, but not most of it. I mean, what are they doing with billions upon billions upon billions of dollars? I mean, we're not seeing much change. Just look at a lot of the stuff. Like, they're supposed to be building wind farms and blah, blah, blah. Where? What are wind farms going to do? Right? A lot of this seems to be like a shell game, if you will. Using wind farms to funnel money to their left-wing, ideologically driven nonsense. But that's sheer speculation, folks. But once again, you know, there is evidence for this, and I've seen plenty of the evidence that, follow the paper trails, if you will. And you'll find a lot of it. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense. It really is. You don't see this same extent on the right with conservative groups. You do not see that. You do not see conservative groups getting billions upon billions of government dollars to fund conservation projects, if you will. You just don't see it nearly. It's a fraction of what is on the right as opposed to what is on the left. And it's a bunch of nonsense, if you ask me. And I think these people, like Natalie Winters, they are doing really, really good work by exposing this. And once again, by exposing this, the corporate media machine, the apparatus, the left-wing apparatus in this country, gets spun up and starts going into work or doing its job or whatever, and exposes themselves as being left-wing driven. It's nonsense, y'all. By trying to debunk Natalie Winters, she dropped a freaking bomb on their head. Oh, is that so? Well, let's just follow the money here and see exactly where it goes. And we find the paper trails, folks. And it sure does look like it. Now, in a roundabout way. Once again, like I said, it does appear that Mark Zuckerberg funded this before he did his change of heart, if you will. So, take that for what it's worth. Mind-blowing, right? Y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. And y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.